I don't know about you, but it feels as though this ending part of the year, specifically for those of us in the LGBTQAI community, but this ending part of the year is kind of a little bit difficult for many of us. And there are numbers of different reasons for that, but specifically for me it's difficult because it seems like the end of this year, or the end of the calendar year, for those of us in the community, we find that there are a number of events that call us to remembrance. It begins on November 20th with the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And just a week or so ago, we gathered together to remember the lives of transgendered men and women who were cut short or who were the victims of violence. And how much more does that bring home to us this morning as we remember Christine and her impact upon our lives and upon this church? But it begins on November 20th and seems to move swiftly through the end of the year to World AIDS Day. The 1st of December, just a few days' time, when we'll be remembering those lives lost because of HIV or AIDS complications, but we'll also be remembering the lives within this community and others of folks who are living with HIV and AIDS. Now, I want to tell you, I think this year is more important than any other year in our history to remember World AIDS Day, because this year in our state, in this country, a great travesty happened to those living with HIV and AIDS as we saw the line cuts in the budget, specifically against those and the most vulnerable in our society, but also against those living with HIV and AIDS. Today I want to tell us, as a church, we need to raise our voice even higher against those budget cuts. We need to do something to create a difference, and we need to stir things up, because budget cuts, as you saw in our slide presentation, equals death. And I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, I don't want to go back to the 80s and 90s, where every week clergy in our denomination, every day clergy in our denomination were burying loved ones who had died because of AIDS complications. We have the knowledge in our country right now to sustain life for those who are living with HIV and AIDS. And that doesn't mean that HIV and AIDS is not with us, but we have the drugs and the medication that can prolong life and can make life better for those living with HIV and AIDS, and it should not be down to being able to afford it in a country like the United States of America. If that's truly who we've become, then we've lost the sense of who God is. We've lost the sense of who God is. And then we move through this period of Advent. And Advent is a time of waiting, of expectancy. It's a time when we begin to think about, what does it mean to have Jesus in the world? What does it mean to have Jesus in our hearts or in our lives? What does it mean for us to live out the mission and the vision of Jesus Christ? What does it mean for us to be a follower of Jesus? And it led to this series of sermons that we're going to be preaching over these next few weeks of Advent questions. Questions about, where is God in the midst of? Where is God in the midst of so much loss? Where is God in the midst of so much crisis? Where is God in the midst of so many things that are compelling many of our lives to question who God is? Now, I have to also say that in the midst of all of this, I'm told by sociologists that church attendance goes up in the midst of crisis. And so perhaps there is a little bit of hope there that people are actually starting to come back to church and start to think about their own spirituality and start to think about their own mortality. But I don't think that we should wait for a crisis to find out who God is in the midst of all of our life situations. Where is God in the midst of loss? It seems to me that there has been an incredible amount of loss this year. And I'm not just talking about lives that have been lost, but it seems that every time or every occasion that we get to meet one-on-one with folks in our own congregation and in our community as a whole, we are hearing a lot about loss. Loss of jobs, loss of friends, loss of loved ones, loss of homes. People not really sure where the next meal is coming from. People not really sure about how they're going to be able to make it through the next day. And I want to tell you, there's something that our 12-steppers teach us in the midst of all this, that you can only keep things in the day. And it's a real lesson that we need to learn. But many of us seem to want to plan out for the future. And it's been difficult for many of us to plan out for the future because we're in the midst of a season of loss. Loss. Where is Jesus? Where is God in this Advent season? Where is the hope in the midst of our loss? It's been challenging for us, I think, as pastors to be able to meet with folks who are dealing with such incredible loss in their lives, to be beacons of hope. You know, we could use the platitudes. This too shall pass. And I've used it. I've told people, this too shall pass. One of the great lines of Scripture, especially in the Advent message, is this came to pass. It came to happen and to move on. But when you're in the midst of it all, how do you find the hope? How do you and I take the energy to get up every morning and to face the world with such loss and with such travesty that's going on? And how do we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, continue to preach and to speak that hope and to live that hope out into the world? How do we do it? Where is this Advent question being answered for us? It becomes extremely difficult, and I kind of alluded to this over the last few weeks, but it becomes a little bit more difficult for us, especially those of us who have bought into this theology that God somehow is a God who waves a magic wand and makes all things right. I want to tell you, it's a very difficult theology for many of us who grew up hearing about that kind of prosperity preaching God. That God that just waves a magic wand, that God that can somehow manipulate a finger down onto the earth and change everything. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in a God of miracles. I believe that God still has the power to do that. I still happen to believe that God is on the throne and watching over us. I still happen to believe that. But I don't believe in this God who just is able just to wave a magic wand. And I don't believe that Scripture promises us that. I don't think that the Scriptures, the sacred text that we read time in and time out, actually promises us a God who is going to fix our problems. And yet, many of us believe in a God who is a fixer, a God who's going to be able to just smooth the way out for us. As I challenged myself this week to ask myself, where is hope in the midst of loss? I had to come to some understanding about the God that I know and the God of my own understanding. And what I've come to know about this God that I know is that this God manifests God's self in so many different ways. And that the God that I believe in is a God who offers me hope in the midst of loss, not by waving a magic wand, but by surrounding me with people like you. Surrounding me with people who sometimes become the hope bearers when I feel as if there is no hope. Have you ever had that experience? That when you feel like there is no hope, that nothing is happening, that somehow there's, I was talking to somebody this week and they said, I can just about make it through December, but I'm not sure what's going to happen after December. And I want to tell you the inspiration of that person as I spoke to them this week, and they're in this congregation this morning, so they know who I'm talking about. But the inspiration of that person who spoke to me was that they had not lost hope, that there was still hope for tomorrow. And I want to tell you, his message was a big, big boost to my hope in the midst of loss, in the midst of the chaos of this world. Now, perhaps I should talk to them on January the 1st and find out where their hope is. But, the reality is I know that God is going to work somehow. But that God is not the magic wand God. That God is the one who's going to work through us opening up to one another.